Welcome back. I'm Rob Folkrod, and this is part 2 in our Adobe Connect overview series for new instructors. In this section, we're going to take a look at a couple of things, a couple of the pods that we're going to be working with on a daily basis. The first is the Who's Here pod that you see I have in the upper right-hand corner of the screen right now, and the second is the chat pod down at the lower right. In the Who's Here pod, we've got a couple of things I want to take a look at. The first is the series of views that are available to us. The second is the set of options and features that we can use in the Who's Here pod. And finally, from time to time, a student may come into your classroom more than one time. So here I want to show a couple of things that we can do to help that student out. But first, the three different views. Up in the top toolbar here, you have three different buttons. And the first one is the attendee view. And this is the view that we are in and day out. We primarily are going to be in this view right here. In here, we can see all of the students who are in the classroom with us. You can see me up as a host there, and we can see that we have right now 2 participants. In here, if a student were to raise his hand, you will see there that Michael just raised his hand, and we can see that indication. On occasion, we can say things like, hey, who's in agreement with me, or do you all understand? And folks will give green checks, or may give a red X indicating that they don't understand. Now, in the Who's Here pod, we can actually clear these out a couple of ways. And the first is that there's an option in the top corner right there that you can go ahead and click on, and it says that we can clear everyone's status. Not difficult, but it's not very quick either. Typically, we'll talk about the hands up pod in a little bit more detail down at the bottom. But you can see also when folks raise their hand or indicate that they don't understand or that they do, that options pop up down at the bottom of the Who's Here pod. And we can clear those from there as well. And although rare, you can use the Who's Here pod to change the permissions of a user. You can take, for example, Nancy here and drag her up into the presenter role. As a presenter, she can control the slide deck or draw on the screen. Now I just want to move Nancy back into the participant collection. The second view that's available to us is the breakout room view. By default, everybody is in the main meeting window, but you'll see that we have 2 breakouts in this classroom, and we can add more by clicking on the plus button right here. You can take a class member and drag him or her into a particular breakout room, and I'm going to drag myself into that same breakout room with Michael. And you'll see that right now nothing actually happens. This is just the setup. Nobody goes anywhere until you go ahead and click the Start Breakout button. Now when I do, we're going to see the screen flash and change up a little bit. Now Michael and I are in this room individually. If I were to turn on the microphone, the camera, only Michael would be able to see me. And this is often convenient when you're trying to work through a lab individually with someone or give them directions that really aren't pertinent to the rest of the room. You can also use this for group discussions and break everyone down into their own individual rooms. Once everybody is done, then we can choose to end the breakouts, bring everybody back. The screen reorganizes. You'll see that we are still in these rooms. So if I were to start breakout again, we would go back to them. So you can leave everybody in the rooms, but simply turn them off, later on sending everyone back to where they were when you need to. And the third view here is the attendee status view. This is not one that I use very often, but it does let you see very easily who is in which individual status. So you can see right here that all of the people who agree, right now Michael, and all of the people who disagree, right now Nancy, are in their own individual box. And as folks move around, they're just categorized by agree or disagree. We have seen how you can promote a student to give him or her a few more permissions, but you can also control permissions on a fairly granular level. I'm going to take my cursor and pause it over Nancy right now, and you can see here how I can enable a few features. I can enable Nancy to turn her video on or off. I can give her the permission to draw on the screen. I can even request for her to share her screen out with me. Normally, you would expect, at least my Windows users, would expect that you could right-click on somebody to get these options. But when you right-click in Adobe Connect, you get a very different context menu, so settings and global settings. But typically what you'll want to do, again, is simply pause over the user, and you'll see those options there. I want to show a couple more things that are helpful when a student may wander into the classroom a couple of times. Here we see that we get a message from Michael King, specifically Michael King 2. It says, "I hear an echo." And if you look up in the Who's Here pod, you'll notice that Michael King is in there twice. We've got Michael King and Michael King 2. This is not uncommon, where someone will click the Launch Class button a couple of times and they're in. Then they end up with both speakers sending out your voice typically, but off by just a little bit, so you sound like an echo. So that's usually your first clue. The second clue is pretty apparent as well when you see someone in there a couple of times. Now, the easiest thing to happen would be for them to just see that they have two screens open and simply close one of those out. While that is the ideal situation, that doesn't always work. So one of the things that you can do is identify which one of the, in this case, Michael King's, which screen are they currently working with. You'll see that they did chat to you under the Michael King 2 name, which means that's probably the one that they can see. So often I will ask, do you want me to close one out? Okay. And often they will come back chatting and saying, yes, that'd be great. And so at that point, you can go ahead and find the Michael King that isn't visible to them and select them. Just go ahead and click on them. And then go up to the pod options. And in the pod options, there is an option to remove selected user. Now you have to be really careful because it's very possible for you to remove the wrong person, to kick the wrong person out of class and start a whole nother set of problems. So before I'm doing anything, I'm just going to look twice. I'm going to make sure I've got Michael King, not Michael King 2. Then I'm going to go ahead and click the pod options and remove the selected user. Okay. There isn't a "are you sure?" They're just gone, so be very careful with that option. Now you'll notice I've got just one Michael King, except he is Michael King 2. So you may want to tell your Michael King, or the rest of your students, that they also have the ability to change their name. And I'll change mine first, and then we'll have Michael change his. I'll click on the pod options, and it's under Edit My Info. I'll choose Edit My Info, and in this time I'll go with my more formal name. I'll go with Robert Folkrod, and I'll click OK, and that changes for me, and everyone else can see that change. You can tell your students that usually on day one, hey, if you have a more or less formal version of your name, go ahead and make a change. And now we can tell Michael King that he can go in and do that same thing. He can go ahead and edit his info. He can remove the 2 after his name, and he can just be regular Michael King. Next, let's look a little more into the chat pod down at the bottom. A couple things I want to take a look at in here. First, the idea of public and private chat, and then finally a couple of the options and who can see what options as you set them. So by default, there is a single tab down at the bottom, what is known as the Everyone tab. As you can see, Nancy just sent a message saying hi there, and we could respond back. And everybody in the classroom can see Nancy's message. But it's also possible for folks to have a private kind of one-on-one communication with you, and they can then send a private message. And you can see right here that I just got a message coming in from Michael King, and it pops up as a yellow tab down at the bottom. Now this is an indicator to you that this is a private chat message that only you can see. And so I'll go ahead and select that, and we can see a little hi from Mike coming in. And we can send a message right back. And again, this is a one-on-one conversation between the two of us. What happens quite often, as I switch back to the Everyone tab, is that as we're interacting in here, Michael just sent a private message. So I may be saying, right, I just say look at page 45, and Nancy got that message, but Michael right now, while he received it, he's not seeing it. Because he's still back on the private chat message with me. When someone does have a private conversation with you, you might want to just early on just say, hey, also remember to go back to the Everyone tab. Now, I don't have a lot of room down there, so you see that as I put my cursor over Michael King, I can go ahead and close that tab out. You'll probably want to be pretty good about closing out those additional tabs. If more and more folks were to have private conversations with you, you run out of room very quickly, and you end up with this little tiny sliver down here with a little ellipsis on it. And it's very easy to miss. So try to be on top of keeping that reasonably closed out so you have room in here, and you'll see as new messages are coming in. Now, to initiate a private conversation, you can go up to any person and pause your cursor over him or her, his or her name, and choose Start Private Chat. And when you do, the tab will pop up and you can send a message to that person. They don't see anything popping up until you transmit the message, but you can send any messages that way. And you can tell your students to do the same. Students also have the ability to carry on private chat messages between themselves. And while I generally don't have a problem with that, some folks like to disable that functionality. So you may go up to the meeting menu, and inside of the preferences options that we've been there a couple of times before, inside of preferences there is a chat pod section which does have this enable private chat for participants, and you can remove that checkbox, click done. At this point you can initiate a private chat message with them. You can see that I still have the ability to chat with Michael or with Nancy. However, under their screens that option has been removed. They may not initiate a private chat with themselves among students, nor can they initiate a private chat with you. So there's a little bit of a downside to that one. So think about how you want to handle your class on that situation. And finally, there's a few options here inside the pod options that you want to be aware of. A couple of these things are just going to impact your system, and a couple of these are going to impact everybody. The first I want to show here is the show timestamps. When I go ahead and click on show timestamps, you will see when each of these messages came in. So you can see when Michael had a chat message with me and when other chat messages came in. Now when you turn this on, it's visible to you and it's visible to all of your students. So this is something that impacts their screen as well. And it may take up a little bit more space on the screen than is really necessary. Clicking on that option again, removing the little check mark next to it, and those options go away. And again, your users, your students are going to see that immediately. You also have the ability to go in and change your chat color. So by default, everybody is black, but you can go ahead and say, no, I would like to be a different color altogether, and any messages going forward are going to appear in orange. Your students have the same ability. I don't know that I usually point it out, but sooner or later folks are going to find that ability there. So just know that, again, it's just my chat color, and it just affects what color goes forward. One other thing that you can do that you will see that will, again, affect everybody is you can go ahead and clear the chat out entirely. So a message pops up for both you and for everybody else that says the chat message has been cleared. Generally, I don't do this very often, but every once in a while you'll see someone who doesn't realize the focus is inside the chat window and they send messages or passwords or things that they shouldn't be sending across the wire, and you just need to clear that out. Unfortunately, it doesn't remove it from the recording, but it does at least get it off the screen quickly. The last piece that I want to take a look at is just in dealing with different monitor sizes. Right now the font size that I see in my chat window is not difficult to read, but it has not been unheard of to end up on a monitor with a fairly large screen and the font is really, really small. So into the chat window there, you can go ahead and change the text size of whatever is going into the chat. And I can set that up to 14. And And you can see right now that it's a little bigger. This particular setting, unlike many of the others we've seen, this particular setting here only affects the user who changed it. So if you have a student who's saying, I'm having a tough time reading what's going on inside the chat message, you can give him or her that clue. You can give them that hint and say, hey, you can just go into the pod options there and change the text size, and it will affect his or her monitor only and not everybody else's. And that's it. That's been a quick look at the Who's Here pod and the chat pod. In future videos, we're going to take a look at several more. I hope it's been helpful.